Okay, so some people are asking like to see like what I look for in Indiegogos and Kickstarters and things like that. Depending on what you're going for, there's certain elements that I'll take notice of, even if it's like, say, somebody doing a first time campaign versus somebody like a Kamen America coming back for like a 10th campaign or something. In the comics and books and everybody else, all the different entertainment setups, there's different markers I look for. Like with comic book setups, I'll see like, okay, who's doing the line work, who's doing the lettering, mention who's doing what, so that way people can go look them up and see like examples of their work beyond the project. Um, but within the project itself, kind of showcase where the coloring's at, where the artwork's at, what kind of timetable you want to have. Like, for example, I'll link it below. The Colossals isn't going to be out until next year, July of next year. But he's already showcasing on the project, like, their progress. And I can even take into account, commissioning my own art, my own setup for Uplift Protocol, even the internal art sometimes, depending on, real world scheduling and everything else that's happening. Sometimes even an internal art for one page can take like a week or two. It just depends on what's happening, around the artist or whoever's helping you work on stuff. And I imagine for a whole entire. Sorry, I'm a bit stuffed up this morning. Yay, allergies. But imagine like a whole entire comic panel. Say it might take like a month to coordinate, everybody together to work on a whole entire page. And this is including, the regular line art, including the coloring, the stuff that they have to do for the dialogue, and all that other stuff. Because sometimes, until you do a project together with people, and you do it a couple of times, like Kamen America has it down to like, kind of like art in a way, because they're familiar with each other, and they already have established like, okay, this is what we got to do to get this out, here's where the story's at. That's why even in comic book Kickstarters or Indiegogos, it's good to even showcase a little bit of the script if you want to. That way you can tell people, it's like, okay, yeah, we already have this story plot out. It's just a fact of getting the team together to work on the various aspects. And sometimes having videos, showcasing other people commenting on your stuff, especially if they have some sort of industry connections, or it could even be former industry connections. No matter what you might think of Ethan Van Sciver, he comes from a background when the Dead 2 were healthy, or healthier, and producing stuff people wanted. And he's also, again, working on his own projects and everything, but the whole idea there is to have somebody commenting that has some sort of like background within what you're trying to do. Even if you take out all the parasocial, like, to quote Aiden Paladin and everything, if you take out all those other connections and just leave it up to whatever that particular artist or writer has under their belt, that's also a kind of a push forward, regardless of what you think of the personality behind the skills and everything else. It's a feather in that campaign's cap that's, a professional was able to give some insight, and even help them out, like changing some sort of layouts and making a certain fight a bit more kinetic. Again, you just take out all the personalities and stuff from it and just look at it from like a skill format, and like even who they're connecting together. If some of the creators have already had some Indiegogos or Kickstarters and they're helping out another creator to do certain things, that's pretty much a boon to that project. And say even to go on the other side with books or anthologies or even pulp magazines, I've backed different things. It can also come down to like how much revenue does the backer have per month to basically explore different projects. Usually I have enough to do at least back 2 projects a month. And usually I'll break it up to for one for each paycheck because, again, you got to think like, okay, how much bills does the person have? How much can they set aside to help out a project? That's the reason why it's important to have like different tiers, or if you've come back to from another campaign and you're doing another one to continue the story, it's good to have catch up tiers. And this is also works for more than just comics and everything. It can work for books and everything else too. Like I've noticed with book campaigns that work, they'll offer the books in a package of like whoever's on their project. They might offer some short story add-ons. They'll offer different books that are outside the campaign, but as like an overall package. Like, hey, would you like to add this on? Sometimes what helps some book campaigns is if you have one or two people that are fairly well known within that particular wheelhouse that you're going for. Like, for example, a handful of books that I have backed on Indiegogos or Kickstarters, they usually have one or two names I recognize, and I'm like, okay, this is kind of what they're going for. They'll explain like what's inside the anthology or whatever they're doing, and then they'll showcase some examples of their contributors' work, or they'll guide you to where like, oh, hey, this is the writer who published da 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 da. Sometimes that's why it's good to have, even if you're completely starting out, to have like one or two people that have a little bit of body of work to showcase, and then you can have a mixture of newer people. But the biggest important thing is maybe with each tier, say like you've already published some books somewhere, offer your own books in the running as well as like extra incentive. I mean, I've noticed it doesn't hurt. That, and as Sir Sova found out, sometimes if you add other things to other tiers, I guess you'll have to add in some instruction on how to add it, because some people wanted the audiobook for some of their stuff but didn't know how to add it to their active tier list on Indiegogo or Kickstarter. So you can even do that too. If you do have something else established in your framework, try to give people a little bit of options, see what they're interested in. And if, say, like what Sorsovo has done is he'll mention, like, this is the writer of that, whatever setup, and he'll mention whatever series this writer's worked on, but he usually has a mixture of people that are fairly established and newcomers. That way more people get exposure. It is a little bit tougher if you have majority people that are like newcomers, but if you put little examples of their work from the project onto your Kickstarter or your Indiegogo, it doesn't have to be like big long samples either. It could just be like a page or two from a couple of the stories, so that way people can get an example of their prose format or what they want to get across. Yeah, again, this is all just an observation from me as a consumer or patron, I guess I could say, because consumer has pretty negative connotations nowadays. But me as a potential patron that wants to check out your stuff. And like I've said before, it's a good idea to offer a digital version of whatever you're doing. Because say like you can't afford to ship it outside the US, or maybe a handful of places like the UK and things, or even Canada, then the digital option will give international people a chance to check out your work. And this goes in the other direction too. Say like you're based out of the UK and you want to get your story across, but it's like, oh my god, look at the shipping fees to send something to the United States. That's why it's always important to have a digital option. I know people make more off the printable option because the additional shipping and handling can help the overall campaign marker go up higher. But yeah, that's why I consider digital options pretty important. And if you also have previous work under your belt, then you can offer that in the additional digital tiers if you want to. I've noticed that Adobe Croger does that, and with the Mythoverse stuff, they will offer extra additional digital goodies or extra physical goodies like of other parts of that setting. Again, I'm just bringing up stuff that I've noticed that comes out of more successful campaigns or guys that are able to reach their flexible goal or even their fixed goal for whatever they're trying to showcase. And I think it's important as a creator to be pretty clear on what kind of story you want to tell, so that way you grab the right kind of patrons that are looking for, say, something that isn't deconstructionist kind of setup, because that's what's all the rage in the mainstream nowadays. Just make sure you're very clear on the themes and what you want to convey in your medium. Because with the right kind of buzzwords, you can definitely attract more eyeballs. Like, say, like even with the cover art for the Colossals here, I'm looking at it. It looks like pretty much, superheroes, and they might be meeting their alternate universe counterparts. And in the background, you can see some people that have like kind of like more of a Power Rangers cosmic setup, where it's like, ooh, this might eventually have some kind of like space opera elements that I'd be interested in as well. Yeah, it's just like little things that you can showcase that can tell people what you want to get across. Now, granted, the project doesn't have like too much of the scripting examples in terms of like what the dialogue's going to be, but they have enough here to where you can get a good idea of where they want to go. That, and if you look at who they've teamed up with, some of these guys are a bit established and they've worked on other projects as well. So it's not like he's come out of the gate, blind. He has some stuff set up to where it's like, okay, people can recognize what he's going for and they like what they see. The biggest thing is like, just doing enough research, because if you are going to start an Indiegogo or Kickstarter, especially if it's a first campaign, if you know enough about how to get the print process out, again, if you offer print services or like a print category or tier, then you'll know pretty much who to use. Like, if you go to people who had successful campaigns and managed to get stuff out on time, even in spite of the weird printing setups for the land of Koof Koof, you'll showcase that it's like, okay, I know like who to talk to, and it's like, okay, what's this printing company's usual rates? Do they understand like the dimensions of, like, say, if you're going to print a comic book, do they understand the formatting of a comic book versus, say, like if you pick a company that specializes more in book printing, do they understand more of the formatting on that end too? That's the reason why, if somebody's campaign ends up being a month or two late, I can definitely understand why. In some cases, say like the campaign hit bigger tiers and they had to add more artwork or more line work or more scripting because they added in a couple more pages of story. Sometimes the artist and the letterer and all that stuff, all those guys, like something could happen in the real world where, say, like they lose internet connection for a few days, because some of the people writing and drawing these books aren't based out of the US in some cases. Sometimes they have patchy internet. The biggest thing is just to try to get your project out as close on time as possible. And then once you're like pretty much a well-oiled machine, like the Kamen America setup, then you can expand outward, and by word of mouth and just the number of projects you put out, eventually you'll start gaining a lot more momentum, and you'll find that as long as you keep at it, keep learning, keep pushing through it, you can end up forming kind of like a miniature comic book company that can expand outward. But the first thing is just to basically set up all the hurdles you need to get past initially. Because once you build up, a pretty decent reputation of getting your stuff out and pretty much making the customers happy with different avenues of support, then what, the sky's the limit. You can keep going. I don't see the Kamen America team slowing down anytime soon. And granted, not everybody's going to have the same timetable as them, so try to realistically set, like, okay, if I'm, say, going to do this 65-page, setup for my comic, and we're a brand new team, realistically, what can we do to see how the scheduling will work. Sometimes it's okay to schedule your thing out where, oh, it's going to be released next year, because it could very easily be where to do one full comic book page, it might take an indie team like a month to do each page, or it might take them like 2 weeks per page because they have to line up everything, and communicate, online in some cases, unless they're all local to each other, which I don't think is usually the case most times. It again, it's like part of it is learning the logistics too. There's a lot to go in before you start your Kickstarter Indiegogo. You gotta realistically know what you're capable of and what your team is capable of. And that way, if you give yourself a little bit of breathing room, you can make sure you get everything done, that the artwork looks pretty good and that the scripting is steady, and even everything else, you just never know what might pop up. And again, that goes with any kind of project, really. Another thing that also helps a project, even if it's, say, your first project, um, be be enthusiastic. Like if you're saying like, oh, this is part one of a series, and they're basically trying to gauge interest in it. It's like that's okay, what? And then what some established Kickstarter people and Indiegogo setups have done, if there's any excess stuff made beyond what they thought they'd get, some of them end up putting that towards, like, say, the next setup in the series, or the next issue, or even the next anthology, or, the next magazine. Because everybody does something a little bit different with these projects, but you just never know. In a lot of cases, Sursova will put some of the excess stuff towards, like, setting up, like, the next magazine. Or like, so he can pay for more submissions, and to get stuff done for the next quarter. And you can even be upfront with that in your project. It's like, hey, if we get any excess stuff on this project, I'm going to put it towards the next project to get that, basically kickstarted in a way. I guess the one last thing I would say, if you're brand new and just starting out, genuinely, make your threshold like $500, because what you should do even before you start the project, be like, okay, how much would this overall cost me if I did X, Y, or Z, and always make sure to factor in who you have to pay, and like what kind of stuff goes towards printing costs and everything else. That's why it's a good idea to ask people who have done a couple of campaigns and like put out a couple of books or a couple of magazines or even a couple of comics, like what was the overall breakdown, But if a backer sees like a lower threshold, especially with a newer campaign, I'm gonna be honest, they'll definitely take more of a look, because if you're completely brand spanking new in terms of campaigns or funding and things like that, it's always a good idea to have a very low threshold. So that way people know that yes, you are starting up, but you're being a little bit more realistic about being a brand new IP on the block. Pretty much, if you manage to get over 500, that's pretty good, And you can add that towards your overall slush pile of what you need to do for the project. That's the reason why, you got to know what the overall cost might be from the get-go, or at least have a ballpark notion, because you're fighting against people that are much more established, and say like the people who are flooding Substack now, to do their own creative projects. You're fighting against people that have notoriety already, even if it's a dying industry. That's why they're fleeing the ship. But you're already going up against that, where, say, the particular consumer base, that's the best way I can put it, is already established towards particular creators. So those creators are going to have an easier time, rather than a bunch of people with newer IPs. Again, most IPs aren't built in a day. And especially if you're new on the scene, you're going to have to work harder to gain some some steam. But once you do, you might end up like a Kamen America, where it's a very well-known indie and can definitely make the money. Make that cheddar to make more Kamen America or more Black Hops, that sort of thing. But yeah, I would say if you get to the point where you can make a few $1,000s on each campaign, that's pretty good. And then you can keep growing stuff from there. Like, I would consider even Vestry and Kyrie to be up there when it comes to indies. They're at least notable on my timeline, in my feed, to where it's like, oh, hey, I recognize those guys. And who knows? Here's hoping that Mr. Jesse White will be even bigger household name in the next couple of years. See you later, everybody.